Hey, everybody, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk. This is a little webinar explaining how the Super 8 and Canis Magnus points are calculated for the sport of toss and fetch. If you've stumbled on this video via the internet, my name is Leah, and I'm the captain of a toss and fetch club team in Framingham, Massachusetts. And this video is really for our team members to hopefully shed a little bit of light on where all those big numbers come from when we are reading the score sheets week to week for toss and fetch. At the end of every session, the team captain is mailed these patches to give out to the team members as achievement awards. And my goal for this presentation is to explain the text on these patches and also the Super 8 pins. A little bit of vocab to get started. If I say team, it means dog and handler. If I say club team, it means the collection of teams that compete together. For example, club team Framingham or club team Boston. The division is the collection of clubs that compete against each other during a session. More vocabulary. Score refers to your raw score plus your handicap week to week. If you don't understand the score, don't even bother with any of the rest of this presentation, okay? Learn what the score is, how your scores compound week to week, and what your handicap is. And that information is important to know before you get going with this information. So if I say points, it refers to either the Canis Magnus points competition or the Super 8 points competition. This is an example of our division from the last time that Club Team Framingham played. So we were seated in the New England division, which was a regional division, and there are 8 teams that are relatively local, even though Maryland isn't technically part of New England. And we can see that our Super 8 points contribution is how the sport calculated our standings. So how are these numbers calculated? Because 3,758 and a half, is a far cry from our score. In order for us to calculate the final number, we need to explain what the Super 8 actually is. So in toss and fetch, the teams that are in your club do not compete against one another. We compete collectively against other clubs that are in the sport. So the way that the sport calculates our contribution to that division challenge is it takes the top 8 scoring teams in the club and uses those points to generate our Super 8 score. So only the top 8 scoring teams in a club are going to contribute their scores to the Super 8 points competition. For some of you guys, that's going to be like, oh God, I'm so relieved, because maybe you're just starting out. For others that are more competitive, the Super 8 is creating room for you to have your scores be competitive in our division, which is pretty cool. There are many different types of teams that make up a club team. Even if our club were huge, like let's say instead of 15 teams, we had 50 teams, it does not matter. Only the top 8 scoring teams in a club accumulate Super 8 points in those division standings. Still doesn't answer the question of how the numbers are calculated. So we're going to use these numbers to make it easy. Let's say there's 3,000 teams total in the league. We can pretty much throw that number away. We don't really need it when we're calculating the Super 8. It's more useful in the Canis Magnus points competition. What we really need to know are the total number of clubs in the league. So let's say we have 150 clubs. We would then multiply that number by 8 to get 1,200 total Super 8 teams. This is where the magic happens with those big numbers. So that number 1,200 is then converted into a points representation. So the number 1 scoring team on any given week would earn 1,200 Super 8 points. Let's say the number 1 scoring team scored 55 after week 1. That team would be awarded 1,200 Super 8 points after week 1. The number 2 scoring team scored 54 and a half after week 1. That team might earn 1,199 Super 8 points. This number gets smaller and smaller as we go down in the scores, and the number doesn't go all the way down to 0 for the Super 8 points. That's for a number of reasons, but if you're really interested, you can check out the score sheets. This is where it gets a little bit sticky. So the Super 8 points are a reflection of scores added together week to week. So their scores are compounded and then reflected in a Super 8 number. So let's say after week 2, because we already explained week 1, 1,200 Super 8 points now equals a score of 110. So 1,200 now has a different value after week 2. As you can imagine, that number value keeps going up and up and up until we hit week 5. If we continue on with that example in week 2, let's say that team A underperforms on week 2 compared to their performance on week 1. They would go down in the Super 8 standings. They would receive less Super 8 points, whereas team B had a consistent score from week 1 to week 2, and they kind of hover in the same Super 8 point score. Okay, the best thing that you can do is check and save the Google Doc week to week that's released on Friday afternoons on Facebook, and you can check out how those standings change. Hopefully by now you're kind of beginning to see the light here. The total number of Super 8 points doesn't change, so your performance week to week, which is your score, slides you either up or down in the Super 8 ranking system. So let's say after week 1 you receive a Super 8 point ranking of 500. But on week 2, maybe you underperformed. That Super 8 number is going to go down. Let's say after week 3 and 4, you are stellar, exceptional. Your Super 8 points ranking might go up to 600-700. Okay, so the Super 8 points aren't added together. You're just sliding up and down that scale. And here we have a little bit of a problem, a little bit of a question that I can't answer, which is fine. We see that if we take a look at the difference in Super 8 points between 129 and 128, we would have 9 Super 8 points. So look at this chart here, 626, which is a reflection of a score of 129. If we subtract 617, which is a reflection of a score of 128, we get 9 Super 8 points. But then if we look down and continue with that equation, we see the difference in Super 8 points between a score of 128 and a score of 127 is 6. So the spread of points is not the same. And I'm not exactly sure how the sport calculates this. Mark is a math guy, and he is very fair. I think that it has to do with the number of teams who earn the same score week to week, but I'm not totally sure. That'd be a question for Mark. I'm going to link the Toss and Fetch website in the video description here. If you have any questions, you can reach out. This slide, and if you just want to pause it and read through it, is really just explaining the importance of making it to 4 out of the 5 weeks in a session. So before you commit to a session of Toss and Fetch, you really just need to look at your calendar and figure out if you can make the weeks. If you can't, you can always do a makeup day. There are 2 other teams, one competing on Saturday, one competing on Sunday, that are local at the moment that I'm recording this. And you can feel free to contact their team captains and do a makeup. But it makes sense, you got to show up in order to contribute. And this slide just explains, in this example, how by missing 1 week, you've effectively halved your contribution to the club's Super 8 points and probably dropped your own personal team ranking. There are all different reasons why people participate and play in Toss and Fetch, and I totally get it if something happens and you can't make Toss and Fetch. It's not the most important thing during the week, obviously, but it's important to show up. Okay, when you can. The Canis Magnus explained. So this is well documented in the rules and also on Facebook because it's much easier to understand. Canis Magnus awards the top 40% highest scoring teams in the league. Here we see the top scoring teams from the fall 95 session, and we can see that 810 is a maximum amount of Canis Magnus points that you could receive. Where did they get this number? ChatGPT helped me out. So 810 is 40% of 2,025 total league teams, and the points decrease after that based on the difference between your score and the highest scoring team. Here we see the rankings for the Canis Magnus competition, and we see that Davidson, Michigan earned the most Canis Magnus points. They weren't ranked number 1 in the Super 8 score. We see that Frisbee Orient was ranked number 1 in the Super 8, so let's dig into that just a little bit. So Davidson had 17 teams in the Canis Magnus Club, while Frisbee Orient had 12. This is an example of a larger club, Davidson, full of amazing teams having a competitive advantage in the Canis Magnus points competition. So Frisbee Orient just didn't have as many teams in their club. Seems like a pretty exclusive club, right? They got all border collies. One top scoring Belgian Malinois, Eduardo Juarez, is contributing plenty of points with his dogs. And, Davidson looks like a larger, more public team. So which club is better? I don't know. The more fun one to play on, I suppose. The one where you have more friends. No, it's it is what it is. The more data you have to throw into the Canis Magnus points competition, the higher the score is going to be. So generally, larger, more established clubs have higher Canis Magnus scores. So here we see Club Team Akron, Ohio, which is the team that Mark Vitullo plays on. We can see that most of their teams are in the Canis Magnus Club. And the Canis Magnus Club is cool because I'm calling it a club if you made it. But by separating the Canis Magnus competition from the Super 8 points, it means that talented teams on larger clubs like Club Akron have an opportunity for their achievement to be recognized, right? Because a majority of the teams in Club Akron, they're never going to make the Super 8 because they just have a ginormous club team full of amazing players. So it is a way for their achievement to be recognized and for those scores to contribute to their club team, which is pretty cool. So hopefully by now you can take a look at these patches and understand the text a little bit better. The Canis Magnus means that you are in the top 40% of the highest scoring teams. Canis Felix patch is going to be a little smaller, and it means that you paid your dues and you showed up to at least 3 weeks of play, which is an amazing achievement in and of itself. And then the Super 8 pins signify whether or not your team contributed points to the Super 8 competition. The yellow pin means that your club team won the division challenge, which is pretty cool. Just another general disclaimer, you don't need to know any of this information in order to get out there and have fun with your dog. So if you're overwhelmed, don't worry about it. I didn't learn what this stuff was until I was a couple years into playing with Ruben because, I just wanted to get out there and have fun with my dog. But if you are interested in digging into these numbers a little bit more, hopefully you found this helpful. I hope everybody has an awesome day. And if you're on Club Team Framingham, I'll see you very soon.